Pulling into the driveway, I hit the brakes. A sleek black SUV sat parked outside my house. Not mine. Not my husband's. But familiar. My stomach tightened as I tried to place it. The clock on the dashboard read 6:15 p.m. I wasn't supposed to be home for another hour. The client meeting had ended early, so I'd decided to surprise my husband with takeout from his favorite steakhouse. But now, standing on my own front porch, something felt off. The door wasn't locked. Not wide open, but just enough to make my pulse quicken. Voices drifted from inside, low, measured tones. One was unmistakably my husband's. The other? A deeper, familiar voice. My mind scrambled and then it clicked. I stepped inside quietly, moving toward the living room. There they were, my husband and his best friend, leaning in slightly, their conversation stopping the second they saw me. For a split second, a flicker of something passed between them, like I'd walked in on something unfinished. Then my husband smiled. "Hey, you're home early." His tone was easy, casual. Too casual. The room was the same. The air was not. Something had shifted. I just didn't know what yet. The change was subtle, but it was there. My husband, usually steady and predictable, had become distant, distracted, lost in his own thoughts. At dinner, he would nod at the right moments but barely taste his food. His phone, once an afterthought, was always nearby, screen lighting up with messages he never read in front of me. His best friend started showing up more often, lingering in the kitchen, avoiding eye contact, his usual easy confidence replaced by something guarded. One night, I woke up to the cold emptiness beside me. The clock glowed 2:43 a.m. I listened for the familiar sound of him shifting in the house. Silence. Slipping out of bed, I moved through the dark hallway and found him in the living room, bathed in the soft blue glow of his phone. His brows were furrowed, fingers frozen mid-scroll. At my voice, he flinched, locking the screen too fast, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Couldn't sleep," he said lightly. But the weight in the air told a different story. Something was pulling him away. And I was just starting to notice. The knock on the door came just after noon. I knew it was him before I even opened it. My husband was out running errands and his best friend stood there, hands in his jacket pockets, expression unreadable. "Just dropping something off," he said, stepping inside. His voice was casual, but there was something beneath it, something thick in the air between us. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination, but as we stood in the kitchen, the conversation felt like a slow dance around something unspoken. His eyes held mine too long, his words deliberate, his presence impossible to ignore. The air tightened. Then it happened. His hand brushed mine on the countertop, a touch that should have meant nothing but lingered a second too long. I didn't move. He didn't either. Before I could think, before I could stop it, he leaned in. A breath, a hesitation, then his lips met mine, a fleeting, stolen moment that sent a jolt through me. My heart pounded as he pulled away, eyes wide, realizing what we had just done. Then the sound of the front door unlocking. My husband was home. I told myself it was a mistake, a meaningless slip, a moment of weakness fueled by tension and bad decisions. But the memory of his lips, the heat of that stolen second, replayed in my mind like a song stuck on repeat. I wasn't supposed to think about it, but I did, constantly. Every glance in the mirror, every quiet second alone, it was there whispering, daring me to admit that it had meant something. He was different now too. When he came over, he kept his distance, his words shorter, his presence heavier. He wouldn't meet my eyes, but sometimes when I caught him off guard, I saw it. That flicker of something waiting, a question left unanswered. My husband barely noticed. He was slipping further into his own world, phone always in his hand, mine somewhere I couldn't reach. Conversations grew shorter, smiles more automatic. I started to wonder, was I the only one keeping secrets? Or was there something else beneath his silence? The thought gnawed at me, but the guilt gnawed harder. I had crossed a line. I just didn't know if I wanted to step back or keep going. I needed to fix this, to push it down, to make everything feel the way it used to. That night, I set the table, lit candles, made his favorite meal, something I hadn't done in months. When he walked in, he smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Over dinner, I leaned in closer, laughed at his jokes, reached for his hand, hoping to close the growing space between us. He responded, but there was a hesitation, a fraction of a second too long before his fingers curled around mine. Later, in the quiet of our bedroom, I kissed him, slow and deliberate, waiting for the rush of familiarity, for the warmth that used to be effortless. He kissed me back, but something was missing. His touch felt routine, his mind somewhere else. Maybe mine was too. I rested my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, willing it to drown out my thoughts. Then my phone vibrated on the nightstand. One message, simple, direct. We need to talk. My breath hitched. It was him. And just like that, the illusion of normal shattered. The message burned in my mind all night. The next day I found myself parked outside a quiet cafe, my fingers gripping the steering wheel too tight. He was already there, leaning against his car, arms crossed, expression unreadable. I stepped out, pulse hammering as I walked toward him. No small talk, no pleasantries. Just his eyes locked on mine as he asked, "Are you sure you want to stop this?" The words hung between us, heavy, daring me to lie. I opened my mouth, ready to say yes, to end this before it went any further. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped closer, my breath catching as his fingers brushed against mine, barely touching, just enough to make my skin ignite. I was the one who moved first, closing the space between us, sealing the answer neither of us could say out loud. The kiss wasn't stolen this time. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, intense, something we both knew we'd never take back. When I finally pulled away, he exhaled sharply, his hand still lingering on my waist. This wasn't just crossing a line. This was erasing it completely. I became two different people. At home I played the role I was supposed to, loving, attentive, present. I laughed at my husband's jokes, asked about his day, kissed him goodbye in the mornings. But outside those walls I was someone else. I lived for stolen moments, for glances across crowded rooms, for the brush of fingers when no one was looking. Every excuse to leave the house felt justified, every lie easy to tell. I told myself I had control, that I was careful, that no one would ever suspect. But my husband was changing too. He started watching me more closely, his casual questions laced with something deeper. "You've been on your phone a lot lately. You're out more than usual." His tone was light, but his eyes weren't. He was noticing. One evening as I stood in the doorway, heart racing from another meeting I shouldn't have had, my phone buzzed. A simple message. "He knows something." My stomach dropped. I read it again, fingers trembling, the weight of those words settling in. The illusion of control I'd clung to was slipping fast. My husband's business trip was the perfect excuse. 3 full days alone, no rushed meetings in cars, no cautious glances over my shoulder. Just freedom. The moment he left, I texted, "Come over." No hesitation, no second guessing. Within an hour he was at my door. No stolen moments this time, no boundaries left between us. It felt different, reckless, dangerous in a way I had convinced myself I wanted. I let my guard down. I let myself believe we had time. Then the front door clicked open. A wave of panic slammed into me. My body froze, my breath caught. His eyes went wide as he stepped back, pulling at the collar of his shirt, straightening himself, but it was too late. My husband stood in the doorway, suitcase still in hand, eyes flicking between us, taking in everything. The tension in the air, the guilt in my expression, the way his best friend looked like he had just been caught mid-sentence. Silence. Then the slow, deliberate way my husband exhaled, his jaw tightening. He didn't need to ask. He already knew. The silence was worse than shouting. My husband didn't say a word that night. He walked past me, past him, set his suitcase down and disappeared into the bedroom. The air in the house thickened, heavy with things unsaid, with truths we couldn't take back. The next morning he was gone before I woke up. No note, no message, just absence. I reached for my phone, my fingers hesitating before dialing. No answer. Another call. Straight to voicemail. He was gone too. The one who had started this, who had pushed me past the point of no return, had vanished. Days passed. The house felt different, hollow, like I was living in a place that no longer belonged to me. Then one evening I walked into the kitchen and stopped cold. A suitcase. My suitcase. Sitting neatly on the table. He stood there, arms crossed, his face calm, unreadable. "I won't yell. I won't beg for an explanation. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." His voice was steady, but the finality in it shattered something inside me. This wasn't anger. This was the end. I left without a fight. There was nothing to say that could undo what had been done. My husband didn't watch me go. He didn't ask where I would stay or what I would do next. He had already erased me. But I told myself it wasn't over. Not completely. I still had him. The one who had turned my world upside down, the one who had pulled me into this mess with just a look. He hadn't answered my calls, hadn't reached out, but I convinced myself he was waiting, giving things time to settle. A few weeks passed, then a month. One afternoon, scrolling through my phone, I froze. A photo. My husband. Him. Laughing, drinks in hand, like nothing had happened. Like I had never existed between them. They had moved on. Without me. My stomach dropped, my fingers numb as I stared at the screen. I waited for something, an explanation, a message, anything. But my phone stayed silent. Hours turned to days. Days turned to weeks. And in the end, I was left with nothing but my own choices and a message that would never come.